I've figured out how to get rid of near enough any addiction you have, and I know that this works because this is what worked for me. What I'm going to be doing in this video is sharing with you how to completely rid yourself of any addictions you might have, whether that could be something like video games, or it could be pornography, or it could be, I don't know, like junk food, it could be caffeine, it could be alcohol, it could be smoking, it could be, I don't know, what else is there? I'd say drugs, but hopefully you're not addicted to drugs, right? But I know that this works because these are some of the addictions that I used to have. I'd smoke, I would drink sometimes, not all that often, but I'd still drink. I'd play video games, watch stupid stuff. I'd be on junk food, eating lots of sugar and seed oils, and then I'd drink lots of coffee. And I had all these addictions, and these addictions kind of had me in their grasp where I was unable to live without them. And so what I've been able to do is, one by one, develop a framework to completely eradicate all of these addictions and regain control over my life so that no stimulus or external chemical can have a grip on me, on my life. And so what I'm going to do in this video is share with you my understanding of addiction. Now, disclaimer, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not qualified to give you advice on how to remove addictions. But I can tell you that by removing these things from my life and by getting rid of these addictions, I've become way more successful, way happier, way more fulfilled. And so maybe right now you're addicted to video games, or maybe you're addicted to junk food or pornography, or maybe you drink too much, or maybe you smoke too much. I mean, you probably know what your vice is and what the problem is. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how I got rid of them, and I'm going to just explain my understanding of this. And in doing so, this should aid you and help you towards your journey of becoming addiction-free. So basically, inside of your brain, you have something called a dopaminergic system. Let's see. So you have a dopaminergic system in your brain. And this is a neurological system that exists inside of your brain somewhere. And it basically is defined as a dopamine seeking system. So I'm going to put seeking here. And the problem with people these days is we are drastically overstimulated, where, if you actually do an audit on your life, is there like a 5-minute window in your day where you are not in some way, shape or form stimulating your dopaminergic system? For example, let's say you're driving and you're listening to music. Well, that's stimulating your dopaminergic system. Or let's say you're eating and you're putting on loads of mayonnaise or sugar or ketchup or sauces, or just, you're eating like a non-stimulating meal like sweet potatoes, but then you're ladling on hot sauce. Well, that's another thing that stimulates your dopaminergic system. And, maybe you're working, but you're listening to music at the same time. There's a lot of things that we do where when we do them, we stimulate this system. And by constantly stimulating this system expects lots and lots of stimulation. And so it kind of has this feedback loop where, if we have the system here, and really the way this works, if I show you, is what does this system look like? My pen's running out. I'll try a different one. What does this dopaminergic system actually look like? Because if you want to cure your addictions, you need to understand how they work. And so what it looks like is like this. This is what a system looks like. So essentially what we have is an input, okay? And this is the stimulation. This is the stimulus. And then here we have your brain. And then we have dopamine. So dopamine is obviously the chemical that makes us feel pretty good. And so what's happening is there's an environmental stimulus like sugar or music or pornography or video games or something or another like smoking or alcohol. And what that stimulus does is we expose ourselves to it through our 5 senses, right? Where we allow it to stimulate us through either looking at it and watching it, tasting it, hearing it, whatever, touching it, etc., etc. And so the stimulus enters our brain, which is then processed by our dopaminergic system. And the outcome of that relationship is dopamine. And then what happens is, dopamine feels pretty damn good. This makes you basically feel pretty amazing in the short term, where, you watch the porn and you feel, in the moment you feel good about it. Or you eat the junk food and at the time, you're satisfying cravings, it feels pretty damn good. The problem is, after doing these things, all these addictions, you don't feel very good afterwards. But in the moment, it feels great. But what happens is a bit of latency elapses here, where, you do it and you feel great immediately, and then afterwards you feel pretty damn bad. You feel pretty shitty. If you've got a hangover, or, if you feel bad after a cigarette or something. And then latency elapses, where a little bit of time elapses, you forget how bad you felt, and all the brain seems to remember is the fact it made you feel pretty good. And then what we have is we have feedback here, where essentially what's happening is, now that you've experienced this dopamine, you want to experience more of it. And so this is called classical conditioning in your brain, in your behavior, where something makes you feel good, and then because it makes you feel good, you want to do more of it. And so really your entire problem is with the stimulation thing, is that you've just got these feedback loops, feeding back around, going from, feeling good back to more stimulus. And so this is really what an addiction is. And this is how your dopaminergic system works on a high level. Now, the problem with this, and the problem with trying to remove addictions from your life, is that the dopaminergic system is a universal mechanism. And so the diagram that I just drew, it doesn't matter if you're smoking crack off of a spoon, or maybe you've just eaten like a chocolate bar. The same system is triggered. The brain cannot tell the difference between the extremity of the stimulation based on what we might perceive ourselves, based on how we might perceive it. So, for example, if you inject heroin, you might think that's a very bad thing to do, and it is. But you might think eating a chocolate bar isn't that bad, and that's true, because heroin is considerably more damaging to the body than a chocolate bar. However, the heroin and the chocolate bar, they stimulate the exact same system. And the loop that I just showed you, as we pass through the triangle into the output from the input, and then we feed it back around, it's the same system. The same addictive dopaminergic system applies no matter what the stimulus is. And so your brain can't tell the difference between a chocolate bar and heroin. All it sees is stimulation, temporarily feeling good, and then afterwards feeling bad, forgetting about feeling bad, and then wanting more of the thing that made you feel pretty good. And so this is why when you quit an addiction, you have terrible cravings, and you have real bad urges to go and find the stimulus that originally made you feel good. And so how do we, quitting an addiction, in my experience, I've done this many times, I've got rid of everything. I used to, when I was younger, I used to watch porn. I haven't watched porn for a long, long time. I got rid of video games, I got rid of junk food, I got rid of carbs, for God's sake, sugar, caffeine I got rid of as well. I managed to stop drinking coffee, got rid of alcohol, got rid of smoking, got rid of all the common addictions. And now I live a clean life free of any vice, basically. And so what I found is when you quit, the thing is, it's not deciding to quit that's the problem. The problem is what happens, you decide to quit, and then really 1 to 3 days elapse. The first day you're going strong, where you try and quit a behavior and you're like, this is easy. But then by the time you get to day 3, you get all these cravings coming in, all of these urges to start going to seek the stimulus that you originally had. And so the reason this happens is because this feedback loop is recurring, trying to bring the stimulus back in. So how do we actually combat this? Well, if we understand that your dopaminergic system is a universal mechanism that cannot, all it wants is stimulation. It doesn't really care where the stimulation comes from. This is the thing about the system, is it doesn't care. I can give you proof of this. So let me explain. So a while ago, I quit sugar and carbs completely. I just completely went on an elimination diet, just doing carnivore. And the first 2-3 weeks of that isn't very fun. You get massive cravings. Your entire metabolic state is fighting for you to eat carbohydrates. And it's a very difficult thing to give up. Probably the hardest thing I've given up is carbs. And when I quit the carbs, my brain was craving the carbs. And the carb, the carbohydrate or the sugar, this was the thing that my brain was pointing at. I want the carbohydrate, I want the sugar, I want the seed oils, I want the junk food, give it to me now. And this was all I was thinking about. But really, if you first principle this out, in this you could replace this with anything, like a game or alcohol, whatever. But the point I'm making here is, I was craving carbs. But really, what do the carbs do? I'm talking about sugar and junk food here. Really, what these things do is they are a stimulant. They're stimulation. And so I wasn't craving the carbohydrates, although in theory I was, but really at a base level, what I was craving was the stimulation associated with the carbohydrates. And so when I quit carbs and when I quit sugar, what started to happen in my life is my brain I got really strong in the whole carb area where I stopped eating carbs, but then I started smoking again or playing games again. And so every time I used to try to quit something, I'd always pick up another old bad habit. And the reason I would do that is because what my brain was trying to seek is the stimulation. Your dopaminergic system, imagine it's like a child. It's like a 4-year-old child. And when it gets bored, it's looking for stuff to do and games to play. And when you take one of its games away, that 4-year-old child is going to do everything in its power to go and find another thing to keep it entertained. And that's how your dopaminergic system works. So my point here is that when you're removing something that's very stimulating and something that's held you in its grip, something that's very, very addictive, and you remove it, you're going to crave it, but you don't really want the thing, you want the stimulation associated with the thing. And so, if you're addicted to social media and you remove social media, you're going to crave being on it, but really that's not the thing. The action's not what you want. You want the baseline stimulation. And so using this knowledge and using this understanding of the fact that it's really just stimulation that you're seeking, what you can start to do is you can start to, when you feel these cravings for stimulation, when you feel these cravings here, what you can start to do is you can start to seek healthy, more fulfilling methods of stimulation. And so what I found a kind of a bit of a hack, a little bit of a loophole in the whole addiction thing here, where whenever I have a craving, I know that I'm just craving stimulation, and I know that the 4-year-old child in my brain, this dopaminergic system that's very immature and very emotional, I know that if I take one of its toys away, I have to give it another toy for it to play with. Because if I don't do that, it's just going to scream and kick, and it's just going to consume my entire life, and it's going to be extremely difficult to block out and deal with. And so what we want to try and do here is you want to look at it like this. How do I visualize this? So we've got our dopaminergic system, okay? And this thing is basically always seeking stimulation. And the reason that everyone has it so bad nowadays is because we let this thing run completely rampant. If you just look at your life right now, you've probably got other tabs open, your phone's probably on the desk, you're probably eating some sort of junk food, maybe, you've got music playing, or, I don't know, but there's probably about, 60 different stimulants that are about to be in your immediate environment in the next 24 hours. And you're just constantly making this thing work. And so this dopaminergic system, it requires stimulation. And so, over time, if you stop stimulating your brain, it will get used to a reduced level of stimulation. So this is a level here. But let's say that right now, with your current fried up brain, that your brain is used to a stimulation level of 100. And by removing one of your addictions, you might be taking away maybe 50 points of stimulation, which means the brain is now half as stimulated as it usually was. And when you do this, the brain's just going to freak out. And so what we want to try and do to combat the cravings and to combat the relapsement into whatever you don't want to do is we want to reintroduce that stimulation that we lost in some way, shape or form back into this level. And so you've got to realize when you're negotiating with your brain, which is basically what you're doing when you're trying to remove an addiction, you have to give it something to take something away from it. You can't just take and expect your brain to just not kick up a fuss, because you're going to be fighting near enough every morsel of your fiber and being and biology to make this work. So we have to negotiate with it, with this dopaminergic system. It's very irrational, but you can't, and you can't just take from it. So when we remove an addiction, we remove points of stimulation, we have to introduce them. And so what I found works really well to do this is, and this is not like an easy fix, this isn't a miraculous fix, but this makes it significantly easier and more likely for you to actually remove the addiction from your life. And so what I found is that there's a few things in my life that I've been able to use to combat this issue. Because the point I'm making here is that when you remove an addiction from your life, you're taking away stimulation from your dopaminergic system. And when you do that, your dopaminergic system isn't going to like you for it, it's going to kick up a fuss. So we need to give it something in return to calm it down and to make it easier. It's still going to kick up a massive fuss, but you can make it easier. And so what we want to do is we want to use one of these 4 things to compensate. So, what I've been able to do here is define a few addictions that are actually good for you and that contribute towards a more fulfilling life. And so what I've basically done with my life, every time I remove an addiction, I increase one of these things. And so if I want to get rid of, I don't know, I don't really have any addictions anymore, like nothing that's too obsessive or obscene. Let's say that I was a smoker and I wanted to quit smoking. Well, I can tell you, like I said earlier, when I quit carbs and sugar, like my smoking habit massively increased. I went from smoking like 1 cigarette a week to smoking like 10 cigarettes a day. And the reason that I was doing that is because I used to get so much stimulation from junk food and from sugar and from fats and from, unhealthy fats and from all these synthetic salts and stuff. So much stimulation would come from my diet that when I cut that, my brain went haywire and it started to look elsewhere in my life for stimulation, and I just started chain smoking like half a packet of cigarettes a day. And that's when I figured out that, it's not, my brain isn't craving, it just wants stimulation. And so what I did is I looked at my life and I looked at what is actually stimulating and what brings me dopamine. I'm just gonna put here, I thought, what is actually stimulating that I can use and introduce into my life on a day-to-day basis to bring my stimulation levels up and negotiate with my dopaminergic system. And I realized there's a few things I can do. So work. So right now, I've been going through like phases of this carnivore diet thing, where the reason I'm making this video is because like I'm still in the process of quitting carbs, and I completely eradicated carbs maybe 2 months ago from my diet. And I still have, the cravings that I've had have sort of come and go, but today and yesterday have been the worst cravings I've had in a long time. Like, to the point where I'm this close to going on delivery and ordering a Five Guys burger. I'm not gonna do it, because that's not me, it's not part of my identity. I don't give in to impulses and cravings like that. But the cravings are real bad. And so, what I'm trying to do today, right, to combat, because I usually don't work today, Sunday, to combat these cravings is I'm making this YouTube video. And because work for me is a method of stimulation, it makes me feel good. It's like, it's problem solving, it's complex, and I'm introducing more work on a day that I wouldn't usually work to A, take my mind off the cravings, but B, to raise the level of stimulation. And you could argue that sitting down in front of a camera and making a YouTube video is not very stimulating, and that's right, it's not. Because by removing carbs, remember, if I've got 100 units of stimulation with carbs in my dopaminergic system, and I remove carbs, dude, I might be removing maybe 40 units of stimulation, which means my brain is now 40% less stimulated, which means it's 40% more likely to just go haywire. So I remove 40 units, but then if I add more work, then I might actually add maybe 15 units of stimulation. Now, I still have a discrepancy here of 25 units, But at least I've made a little bit of a dent in how difficult it is to deal with those cravings and how likely I am to relapse. And so this is the point I'm making here. This is how you fix this. Is you're never gonna work is never gonna be as stimulating as a milkshake. Like, you know, work is never gonna be as stimulating as a massive burrito with hot sauce and like guac and like tortilla chips and like then like brownies and stuff like that. Like making a YouTube video is never gonna hit my brain in the same way that, you know, a perfectly engineered piece of junk food that's been engineered by thousands of scientists, it's never going to hit the same. But it might numb the pain a little bit of getting rid of this. And so work is the first thing that I look to introduce when I've got cravings. The second thing is socializing. You can get a huge level of stimulation from socializing. And so, you know, if I'm going through cravings, I'll invite friends around. You know, like for example, if I'm on Carnival, I'll barbecue and I'll just sit and talk to my friends for like hours. Or I'll call people, I'll call my family, and you know, I'll message people, and like I'll just become more social, because socializing is a fantastic, brilliant way of bringing more dopamine into your life, and it's a stimulant. And you know, you could argue everyone's addicted to socializing, but then is a biological imperative really an addiction? Probably not, because we kind of need it to survive, otherwise you go insane. And so if I remove something from my life, I'll increase the amount of socializing I do. I remember when I was quitting video games a long time ago, and like what I would do is I just play Monopoly with my friends all the time, because I was craving that video game loop where I needed the stimulus of the game, and so I just started playing board games and chess. Like, you know, if you want to quit video games, just introduce a game that's not as damaging, right? You know, you negotiate, you remove the big bad thing, and maybe you add something little just to help you deal with it. And so that's the other thing you can introduce is socializing. The other thing that I've been able to introduce that's been extremely useful in terms of entertaining me and keeping me stimulated without my brain going too haywire is reading and documentaries, and specifically reading stuff that you're actually interested in. So as of recent, I've been reading a lot of books about people who have conquered the world. You know, I can give you a prime example of this, actually. So because I'm still going through carbon, sugar, and seed oil withdrawal, like my brain's still haywire, and like I'm going through. I don't get rid of addictions all the time. Like I don't have many left to get rid of, to be honest. Maybe music, but that's a difficult one to contend with. However, like, you know, I've got this book here. This is Napoleon's biography. This is like a 850-page book, and you can see like since I quit carbs, like I've made some pretty strong headway into this thing. I'm like on page like 600 now, and so this is another thing that I've been doing to stimulate myself, because I can't go to social media and short form content. I can't go to YouTube because I've got rid of those things. Those are not the things that I want to have in my life. Well, I don't want to, if I'm bored and I'm craving carbs, I don't want to go and sedate myself with, you know, some short form content bullshit. Like I want to use that energy to, you know, put it into something that I actually find like, trust me, reading a biography is nowhere near as stimulating as like going and watching the Sidemen play Among Us. Like it's not, it's just a book, right? However, it's still a little bit stimulating, and that's enough. And so that's, you know, something I've been doing recently, is reading. And then the other thing you can do is you can watch documentaries or like old school movies that are like better for your attention span. So yeah, you can just introduce reading. Like once again, if I've taken 40 units away of stimulation from my dopaminergic system from that child in my brain, I start reading a book, the book might only bring 5 points of stimulation, but it's still enough for me to not relapse. And whether or not you relapse into an addiction and into an addictive state is highly dependent upon how wild this thing goes in your brain. And by introducing these things, all we're doing is making the brain go less wild and therefore reducing the likelihood that you actually do relapse. The biggest one, there's a little voice crack for you there. The biggest one that I think I've been able to find that helps though is exercise. Exercise is probably, out of all of these things, the most stimulating thing that you can do. And so, you know, what I've been doing recently, I mean, I exercise regularly anyway with like runs or like calisthenics or whatever, but typically with this carb withdrawal thing, it doesn't hit me until like the evening, because throughout the day I'm working and I'm good, and if I'm taking a break, I just read for a bit. But when I don't want to read anymore, and when I'm done with work, when there's no one around, well, what the hell do I do? Well, really the only thing that's going to stimulate me more than anything is exercise. And so, long distance running or calisthenics or like whatever. And you can introduce this thing and you can do more of this, and you can do it with a higher intensity. And the more of this you do and the more intense you make the exercise, the better you'll feel afterwards. And so, exercise is a huge stimulant, and it's a great way of temporarily nullifying the effect of the removal of one of these addictions. And then finally, you've got cold and hot exposure. So did you know that if you take a cold shower, that it's as dopaminergically stimulating as taking like cocaine? That's not even a joke. I remember reading this a while ago. I can't remember the statistic. Maybe I haven't thought this through critically enough. But from my understanding, cold showers and cold water is incredibly stimulating for your dopaminergic system, in the same way that so is heat. So saunas, or I don't know, maybe you haven't got access to a sauna, but cold and hot exposure and rotating between those two things for a short period of time is immensely stimulating, and is significantly helpful to introducing stimulus into your life, or stimulation into your life. And so really, these things, they're not that stimulating. They are stimulating, but stimulation works on the scale of contrast. And so work will never be as stimulating as being drunk. And socializing will never be as stimulating as watching porn or playing video games. And reading will never be as stimulating as watching of doom scrolling through TikTok. And exercise will never be as stimulating as eating loads of crap. And cold and hot exposure will never be as stimulating as, I don't know, like insert addiction here, doing drugs or something. But they are somewhat stimulating. And if you think about it from a what would you call it, like a classical standpoint, this was all human beings really had access to for like a long, long time. All of the new age addictions that have come in, like video games and pornography and sugar and music and all of these really stimulating addictions, they've only really come into play in the last 100 or so years. All cavemen really could have done for stimulation was exercise, socialize, and work, and maybe getting a cold plunge every now and then if there was one available. And so it is possible to bring your brain back to a natural state. You just have to undo many years of conditioning. However long you've been alive for, you have to undo all of that neural conditioning, which takes a few years. But I'm telling you, this is true, and this can work. And what I'm doing at the moment with my brain and with my levels of stimulation is I'm slowly reducing how much stimulation it requires for me to feel like I'm actually having a good life. And I'm trying to centralize that to these things specifically here, which are way more natural, steady, calm, traditional ways of getting stimulation and dopamine. And I think if these were the only things that stimulated you, you'd probably live a way less chaotic, depressive, anxious life. Imagine if this was the only ways you could get your stimulation from. You can't get it from food or from your phone or from all of this crazy crap, and you could say cavemen might have had alcohol, sure, fair enough. But all I'm saying with this video is that you have a system in your brain called a dopaminergic seeking system. That's probably not the actual biological term for it, but this is just from my experience. And that system seeks stimulation, and the amount of stimulation it seeks is dependent upon how much stimulation it's become used to. And so near enough everyone in their life has a level 100 stimulation, where they're stimulated through the roof and they can't get enough of dopamine. But if you want to fix this, you have to remove extremely stimulating things and try to replace them with less stimulating things. And if you do that for a couple of years, it will be really painful and it will really, really suck, and your entire body and brain will fight you for it. But if you do it and you have the willpower to stick to it, and you also have an environment that supports that, then over time, you'll reduce this level of stimulation required, and you'll become way more focused, sharp, calm, steady, reliable, etc., etc. And so that's what I've learned about removing hardcore addictions. I know it works because I've done it myself many times, and I hope this understanding in some way, shape, or form contributes to you being more healthy. Goodbye.